Hi, my name is George Ryder, owner of Wheel It Bicycles. We're here to figure out what direct labor variance is, how to find it, and how to apply it to a business.
Okay, George, first we need to know how many hours you've allowed for output and the amount of units you've produced.
We allow 7 hours for output and have produced 1,500 units.
Okay, so you're going to put the 7 hours times the 1,500 units up here. So then your standard hours would be 10,500 by multiplying the 7 hours by the 1,500 produced units.
What do you guys need to know besides that?
We need to know how much you plan on spending for direct labor per hour. This will give us your standard rate.
My company plans on spending about $10 per hour on direct labor.
Okay, so that'll be your standard rate. So now you multiply your standard hours by your standard rate, which will give you your estimated total cost, which would be $105,000. So now that we know how much you're expecting to spend, let's figure out how much you actually spent. How many direct labor hours did your company incur?
We incurred about 10,000 direct labor hours during the process.
Okay, so those 10,000 hours would be your actual hours. Now, what about your direct labor rate paid per hour?
We plan on spending about $11 an hour on direct labor.
Okay, so the $11 per hour would be your actual rate. So then you multiply the actual hours by the actual rate, and you get your actual total cost of $110,000.
Okay, so I spent 5,000 more than I expected to. That doesn't sound too good.
Correct. So since $110,000 is what you spent, and you expected to spend $105,000, your direct labor variance would be $5,000. This is unfavorable because you spent $5,000 more than you expected to.
So what do I need to do to make it better, or who do I talk to about this?
Well, first we have a couple more things to figure out before we can determine which department you need to talk to. We need to figure out the labor efficiency variance and the labor rate variance. We need to take your actual hours, which are 10,000 hours, which would go here, and multiply them by your standard rate, which would be $10 per hour. This gives you a second total cost of $100,000. This helps you to separate the spending variance of $5,000 into two categories, the efficiency variance and the rate variance. Labor efficiency variance measures the utilization of labor according to its expectations. It is useful in highlighting areas in production that are using more labor hours than expected.
How can I find my efficiency variance?
You would take the difference between your second total cost, $10,000, and your standard total cost, which is $105,000. The difference between the two is $5,000. This is favorable because your second total cost, which you actually spent, is $5,000 less than what you expected to spend.
That's a good thing, right?
Yes, for your efficiency variance, but now we need to look at your rate variance. Labor rate variance is the difference between the actual labor rate paid and the standard rate multiplied by the number of actual hours worked. If unfavorable, the cost of labor was more expensive than expected. If favorable, the cost of labor was less expensive than expected. This is useful for planning purposes in the development of budgets and for feedback on employees who are responsible for the direct labor side of business.
Okay, and how do we find that?
To look at your rate variance, we would take your actual cost, which is $110,000, and subtract $100,000 from that. And that would be $10,000. This would be unfavorable because you spent $10,000 more than what you expected to spend.
So my efficiency variance is favorable, but my rate variance is unfavorable?
Correct. So I'm going to tell you how you can apply this to your company. To conclude, because the efficiency variance was favorable, the production department of George's Bicycle Company, Wheel It, was successful in making sure they did not use more labor hours than they predicted. However, George should talk with his wages department. Because of the information provided by the rate variance, we can see that they spent more money on wages for employees than they expected to. If George can fix this problem with the wages department, Wheelit should be able to have favorable spending variances in the future.